Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Israel's pulled its ground forces out of the Gaza Strip as a proposed 72-hour ceasefire enters its seventh hour. Israeli and Palestinian factions have agreed to attend talks in Cairo to negotiate a longer-term agreement. Gaza officials say at least 1,865 Palestinians, overwhelmingly civilian, died during Israel's offensive, which began on July 8th. Israel says 64 of its soldiers and 3 civilians have been killed. Protests against the Israeli offensive continued across the United States and around the world. In Britain, a prominent Foreign Office minister, Saeed Awarsi, has resigned, saying Britain's policy on the crisis in Gaza is, quote, morally indefensible. Human Rights Watch has accused Israel of illegally shooting and killing Palestinian civilians who were attempting to flee. Witnesses described a series of incidents late last month in the southern town of Kuza, where Israeli troops opened fire on civilians who've been ordered to leave homes where they were sheltering. We'll have more on Gaza after headlines. Documents provided by Edward Snowden have revealed the deep ties between Israeli and U.S. intelligence agencies. Writing at The Intercept, Glenn Greenwald says the leaks show, quote, Israeli aggression would be impossible without the constant lavish support and protection of the U.S. government, unquote. A 2013 document describes a, quote, far-reaching technical and analytic relationship between the NSA and its Israeli counterpart against, quote, mutually agreed-upon geographic targets. The partnership includes a, quote, dedicated communications line supporting the exchange of raw material and daily analytic and technical correspondence. The German publication Der Spiegel, meanwhile, has reported, based on anonymous intelligence sources, that Israel spied on U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry during peace negotiations between Israelis and Palestinians last year. A public library in Evanston, Illinois, has reversed its cancellation of a talk by Palestinian-American journalist Ali Abunimah following public protest. The library had tweeted plans to, quote, reschedule Abunimah's talk about his book, The Battle for Justice in Palestine, citing the need to add, quote, more speakers on this complex issue. Abunimah accused the library of political censorship, and his supporters wrote to the library, which has now reversed course, saying the talk will take place as planned. In West Africa, the death toll from a historic outbreak of the deadly Ebola virus has risen to 887, with more than 1,600 people infected. The disease is spreading in Nigeria, Africa's most populous country, with 4 suspected cases, including 1 death. In Liberia, health centers have reportedly closed down amidst fears they're not equipped to handle the highly infectious virus. A physician's assistant there said many health workers are afraid.
The health workers think that they are not protected. They don't have the requisite materials to use as to protect themselves against the Ebola diseases. So many of the health workers, including physician assistants, nurses, and so forth, are staying home.
Nurse who contracted Ebola in Nigeria was due to arrive in Atlanta, Georgia today to join an American doctor already receiving treatment. In New York City, a patient who recently returned from West Africa is undergoing testing after falling ill, but officials said it was unlikely he had Ebola. In northern Iraq, Kurdish security forces are battling Sunni militants near the site of the country's largest dam. Militants from the Islamic State attacked the town of Sinjar over the weekend, forcing up to 200,000 people to flee and stranding many in the mountains. The UN Children's Fund said 40 children from the Yazidi religious minority had died from violence, displacement, or dehydration. Sinjar was previously a haven for civilians forced to flee other parts of Iraq. The Iraqi government has sent its air force to assist the Kurdish militias. A federal court has ruled an Alabama law requiring abortion providers to obtain admitting privileges at a nearby hospital is unconstitutional. The law would have closed 3 of 5 abortion clinics in the state. While abortion opponents claim such requirements make patients safer, U.S. District Judge Myron Thompson ruled the law would actually undermine patient care and place an undue burden on access. The ruling comes just days after an appeals court struck down a similar law in Mississippi, which threatened to close the state's lone abortion clinic. In Texas, more than half of abortion providers have closed under a similar rule. Texas providers have launched a new legal challenge to the restrictions passed in the face of mass protests last summer. The law's next phase, which imposes hospital-style building standards, could leave Texas with fewer than 10 abortion clinics if it takes effect on September 1st. Newly released documents show a death row prisoner in Arizona was injected 15 times with a new drug cocktail during a botched execution last week. Attorneys for Joseph Wood have called his death the most prolonged, bungled execution in recent history. Wood gasped for air, choked and snorted during the 2-hour-long ordeal. He'd been injected with a relatively untested drug cocktail, eventually receiving 15 times the intended dosage of each drug. Arizona's halted executions pending a review of its protocols. The mayor of Toledo, Ohio, has lifted a water ban impacting 400,000 residents, saying the city's drinking water is now safe. The ban went into effect Saturday after prior tests found high levels of the toxin microcystin, which is tied to algae blooms fueled by climate change and industrial farming. And former White House press secretary and leading gun control advocate James Brady has died at the age of 73. In 1981, while serving as press secretary for President Ronald Reagan, Brady was shot in the head during an assassination attempt on Reagan. Brady suffered brain damage, which impaired his speech and memory and left him partially paralyzed and in a wheelchair. He went on to become a leading advocate for gun control, successfully pushing for a 1993 law bearing his name, which imposes background checks on many gun sales. In 2011, 30 years after he was shot, James Brady continued to call on Congress to take action on gun control.
I know I would not be sitting here in this damn wheelchair if we had common sense legislation. I used to be a track runner, no more. But I'm not going to run away from this.
James Brady died in Alexandria, Virginia on Monday after a series of health problems. He was 73 years old. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Aaron Mate. Welcome to our listeners and viewers around the country and around the world.